The sea doesn't give you things for free. I was 48 years old when I learned that lesson for good, staring at a ghost on a sonar screen 60 miles off the coast of Cape Cod. My sonar tech, a kid named Leo, just kept whispering, "Cap, that can't be right. It's too big, and it's perfect." He was right. It was a shadow in the machine, a perfect silhouette of an ocean liner lying upright in a trench no one had ever bothered to chart. When we sent the deep tow camera down and the Coast Guard saw the feed, the radio went silent for a full minute. Then, their commander's voice crackled through, thin and shaky. "Captain Blackwood, are you declaring a ghost? What would you do if you found something that shouldn't exist? Let me know in the comments if you'd have the courage to go further. Subscribe for the full story, and tell me what city or country you're watching from. You won't believe what we found down there." My name is Silas Blackwood. I'm 48 years old, and for 30 of those years, the Atlantic off the coast of Cape Cod has been my office, my church, and my confessional. It's a place that rewards patience and punishes arrogance, and I've learned to give it the respect it demands. My life is a simple rhythm of rust and salt water, of diesel fumes and the cry of gulls. My boat, the Sea Serpent, isn't a pleasure craft. She's a workhorse, scarred and stained from 1,000 jobs. Her hull a testament to every rock, reef, and forgotten piece of history we've ever pulled from the depths. She's more home to me than the small house I keep on the shore, a place that always feels too quiet, too still. That morning started like any other. The sun was a pale orange smear on the horizon, the air crisp with the promise of a calm day. The sea was glass, a deep, placid blue that stretched out to meet the sky in a seamless line. It was what we call a milk run, an easy, low-risk contract to map the debris field of an old 19th century clipper ship, the Wanderer. We knew roughly where she went down, and the client just wanted a detailed survey for a historical society. It was straightforward work, easy money. My first mate, Arthur Jensen, a man whose face was a roadmap of every storm he'd ever weathered, was at the helm, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand. He navigated the currents with an instinct born from a lifetime at sea. Down below, Leo, my young sonar tech, was calibrating his equipment, his face illuminated by the green glow of the screens. On deck, a new hand, a kid named Charlie Grant, was coiling ropes, his movements still a little too precise, a little too green. The routine was comforting. The low, steady thrum of the engines was a heartbeat. The smell of salt, mixed with the faint scent of coffee and old grease, was the air I was born to breathe. We'd been at it for hours, running a grid pattern over the search area. The multi-beam sonar painted a picture of the seabed on Leo's monitors, a landscape of sand, rock, and the occasional ghost of a forgotten fishing net. It was hypnotic, almost boring. I was in the galley, pouring myself another coffee, when the rhythm broke. It wasn't a sound, not at first. It was a change in the engine's hum, a subtle shift as Arthur adjusted our course. Then, Leo's voice came over the small intercom, a single word that cut through the calm. "Cap." There was no urgency in it, just a note of confusion. I took my mug and went to the sonar station. Leo was leaning forward, his brow furrowed. He pointed at the screen. "Take a look at this. Ran the pass twice. It's not a glitch." On the monitor, amidst the gentle rolling contours of the seabed, was an object. It was an anomaly, but not the kind we usually find. Wrecks are messy. They're piles of broken timber, scattered cannons, or twisted steel. This was clean. The lines were too straight, the angles too perfect. It was a massive, rectangular shadow sitting in a deep trench we hadn't even known was there. It wasn't on any of our charts, old or new. "What do you make of it?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Arthur had come in behind me, drawn by the silence. He squinted at the screen. "Rock formation?" he grunted. "Submarine canyon with some weird geology?" But he didn't sound convinced. Leo shook his head. "No way, Arthur. The returns are too uniform. It's metal, a lot of it. And look at the dimensions. He started running calculations, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The numbers that came up made no sense. It was longer than 3 football fields. And it was sitting perfectly upright, as if it had been gently placed there. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. It was a feeling I knew well. The deep-sea mariner's instinct that tells you when the ocean is showing you something you're not supposed to see. Things this big don't just get lost. Not without a story, not without a storm, not without a place in the history books. Especially not here, in one of the most heavily trafficked and surveyed shipping lanes in the world. Run the grid again, I said. Wider this time. I want to see the whole thing. For the next hour, the mood on the Toba Sea Serpent shifted. The easy calm of the morning was gone, replaced by a tense electric silence. Charlie Grant came in from the deck, his eyes wide, sensing the change. We all watched the screen as the sonar slowly, painstakingly, painted the full picture. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't a geological formation. It was a ship. A colossal, man-made structure that dwarfed anything we had ever looked for. It was an ocean liner, unmistakable in its shape, with a silhouette that felt both familiar and deeply wrong. It lay there in the crushing dark, 3 miles down, a silent, impossible giant. My crew was buzzing with a nervous energy. I could hear them whispering about salvage rights, about the find of a lifetime. But all I could feel was that cold dread spreading through my veins. It was the same feeling I'd had years ago, on another boat, on another dive, right before everything went wrong. This wasn't a treasure, it was a tomb. And it was a tomb that shouldn't exist. I stared at the perfect shadow on the screen, a ghost in the machine. We were 60 miles from shore, floating above a secret the ocean had kept perfectly. Every instinct, every lesson 30 years at sea had taught me, was screaming that this was something to be left alone. But the faces of my crew were looking at me, waiting for a decision. What would you do in that moment? Would you trust that gut feeling telling you to turn back? Or would curiosity, the promise of discovery, be too strong to ignore? Let me know in the comments if you'd have the courage to go further. Subscribe for the full story, and tell me what city or country you're watching from. You won't believe what we were about to find down there. My crew was electric. Young Charlie was practically bouncing on the balls of his feet, his eyes wide with the gold rush fever that hits every greenhorn when they think they've struck it rich. Arthur, ever the pragmatist, was already talking tonnage and salvage contracts, his voice a low rumble of calculations. Even Leo, the quiet tech, was caught up in it, running simulations of the wreck's structural integrity. They were seeing the find of a lifetime, a billion-dollar ghost that would put our names in the history books. But all I saw was a warning. My gut, the same instinct that had kept me alive through rogue waves and equipment failures for 30 years, was screaming. It wasn't the cold dread of a dangerous job. It was something else, something deeper. An ancient, primal fear of a thing that was fundamentally wrong. I held up a hand, and the chatter in the small sonar room died down. 4 pairs of eyes locked on me, waiting. "We don't know what that is," I said, my voice flat. "And we're not claiming anything until we do." Arthur started to protest. "Sigh, we've got the sonar data. The position is logged. This is ours." I shook my head. "We have a shadow on a screen, Arthur. That's all. We need eyes on it." The tension in the room shifted. They knew what I meant. It was time to deploy the eye. Our remotely operated vehicle wasn't anything fancy. Just a reinforced steel frame with a high-definition camera, a couple of powerful LED floodlights, and a manipulator arm we mostly used for grabbing small artifacts. It was tethered to the Sea Serpent by 3 miles of armored fiber-optic cable. It was our window into the abyss, a fragile extension of our own senses into a place where human beings were never meant to go. Getting the eye into the water was a slow, deliberate process. The sea was still calm, but at the depths we were talking about, the surface conditions were irrelevant. Down there, the pressure was over 6,000 pounds per square inch, a force that could crush our ROV into a tin can if a single seal failed. Charlie and Arthur worked the winch on the aft deck, their movements precise and economical. I was at the controls, my station set up next to Leo's. The screen flickered to life, showing the gray, choppy surface of the Atlantic from the ROV's perspective. I gave the nod. The winch groaned, and the eyes slipped beneath the waves. The world on my screen dissolved into a churning cloud of blue-green bubbles, and then, silence. We were going down. The descent felt like an eternity. The only sounds in the cabin were the hum of the computers and the quiet clicking of the winch paying out the cable. On my monitor, the depth gauge was a relentless, climbing number. 500 feet. 1,000 feet. The sunlight faded, the vibrant blue giving way to a deep, inky indigo. By 2,000 feet, we were in the midnight zone. Total blackness, punctuated only by the occasional, ghostly flicker of a bioluminescent creature drifting past the lens. The water column was thick with marine snow, a constant, gentle blizzard of organic debris falling from the world of light above to the crushing dark below. It was hypnotic. Leo kept his eyes on the sonar, guiding me toward the target. Another 500 feet, Cap. Dead ahead. You should be right on top of it. My hands were slick on the joysticks. I eased back on the thrusters, letting the eye drift. The depth gauge read 15,800 feet, 3 miles straight down. Lights, I said, my voice a croak. I flipped a switch, and the ROV's powerful LED beams sliced through the darkness. For a moment, all we saw was the swirling snow, brilliantly illuminated. Then, the light hit something. It wasn't the seabed, it was a wall. A sheer black wall of steel that rose up out of the gloom and disappeared into the darkness, above and beyond the reach of our lights. It was smooth. Too smooth. There were no corals, no sea anemones, no rusticles like the ones that bleed down the hull of the Titanic. There was nothing but clean, black metal. I nudged the ROV forward, my heart pounding against my ribs. The crew behind me was utterly silent. I moved the eye upward, following the wall of steel. We passed a line of circular windows, portholes, each one a perfect, dark eye staring back at us from the abyss. They were intact. The glass wasn't even broken. Then the light caught a glint of gold. I maneuvered closer, the thrusters whining softly. Carved into the side of the hull in elegant, sweeping letters was a name. I didn't need to read it aloud. We all saw it at the same time. A name that belonged to a ghost, a legend. Cot Knox. Sild. Cod Knox. Cod Knox. You are Sild de Cod Knox. Doest Tot Knox. Lech Treed. Cod Knox. Cod Knox. Sild de Cod Knox. Cot Knox. Lech Treed. Cod Knox. Mood went through the cabin. Charlie let out a choked whisper. No way. It can't be. He was right. It couldn't be. The Titanic was hundreds of miles from here, lying broken in two on the abyssal plain. We had all seen the footage, the images of its decay. This was different. This ship was whole. It was perfect. I piloted the eye along the hull, our lights revealing an impossible sight. The paint was barely faded. The brass fittings on the portholes gleamed as if they'd been polished last week. There was no sign of impact, no twisted metal, no evidence of a violent end. It was sitting perfectly upright on the floor of the trench, as if it had been gently set down, a museum piece in the deepest, darkest gallery on Earth. This wasn't a discovery, it was a contradiction, a thing that defied history, physics, and logic. The excitement my crew had felt was gone, replaced by the same creeping unease that had been twisting in my gut all along. This wasn't a treasure to be salvaged. It was a tomb, a perfect, pristine tomb that had no right to be here. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that we were out of our league. This was bigger than a salvage claim, bigger than any of us. I reached over and killed the external feed, the screen going dark for the rest of the crew. Then I picked up the satellite phone. My hands were steady, but my mind was reeling. I dialed the number for the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and then the Coast Guard. I had to report this. I had to hand this ghost over to someone else. It sat down there in the dark, a perfect steel ghost, almost begging to be brought to the surface. But when something looks too good to be true, it usually is. What would you have done? Would you have the courage to even try and pull something like that from the deep? Let me know what you think. And subscribe if you want to hear more stories from the places the light doesn't reach. Because what came next was even more impossible than the discovery itself. The 24 hours after that phone call were a blur of noise and authority. My quiet patch of ocean, 60 miles from anywhere, became the busiest place on the eastern seaboard. First came the Coast Guard cutter, a sleek, gray predator that circled the sea serpent like a shark. Then, on the horizon, the R/V-2 Atlantis appeared, a state-of-the-art research vessel from Woods Hole, its decks bristling with cranes and strange-looking equipment. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their rotors chopping the salt air. My crew and I were suddenly guests on our own boat, relegated to the sidelines as men and women with clipboards and serious faces came aboard, their questions sharp and precise. They downloaded every bit of our sonar data, every frame of the ROV footage, their expressions unreadable. Arthur tried to talk about salvage law, but a man in a crisp naval uniform just gave him a thin smile and told him this was now a matter of national security. They wanted me on the Atlantis. The lead scientist, a man named Dr. Eris Thorne, a lean, silver-haired oceanographer with eyes that had seen the bottom of every ocean on Earth, personally came over to my galley. He didn't treat me like some hick fisherman who'd stumbled on something he couldn't understand. He spoke to me as a peer, one captain to another. He told me they were deploying the Triton, a 3-person deep submergence vehicle, and he wanted me in the pilot's sphere with him. "You found it, Captain Blackwood," he said, his voice a low, academic rumble. "You deserve to see it with your own eyes." Every instinct in my body screamed, no. I had seen the ghost in the machine. I didn't need to visit it in its tomb. But another part of me, the part that had kept me at sea for 30 years, the insatiable curiosity to know what lies beneath, couldn't refuse. I was being offered a front-row seat to the impossible, and I had to take it. The inside of the Triton was a claustrophobic web of wires, gauges, and screens, all encased in a thick acrylic sphere that offered a panoramic view of the abyss. I was wedged between Thorne and a quiet, focused pilot. As we were lowered from the belly of the Atlantis, the world outside the sphere went from the gray chop of the surface to a placid, deep blue, and then, inevitably, to absolute black. The descent was different this time. It was silent, smooth, a controlled fall into another world. There was none of the mechanical groan of the eye's winch, just the soft hum of the sub's life support and the occasional crackle over the comms from the surface. Thorne was narrating our descent, pointing out deep-sea corals and strange, gelatinous creatures that drifted past our viewports like alien ghosts. But I wasn't listening. My eyes were fixed on the sonar screen, watching the massive shadow grow larger, resolving itself into the impossible shape I now knew by heart. Coming up on the target, the pilot announced, his voice calm, professional, switching on external arrays. A bank of powerful lights flickered on, flooding the water ahead with a brilliant white glare that cut through the darkness for hundreds of feet. We were hovering above the trench, looking down. And there it was. It wasn't a shadow anymore. It was real. A colossal, black shape resting on the sea floor. From this vantage point, we could see its full, breathtaking scale. It was a giant, sleeping in the dark. The pilot eased us down, bringing the Triton in for a slow pass along the starboard side. The sub, a marvel of modern engineering, felt like a bathtub toy next to this thing. We glided past the rows of portholes, our lights reflecting off the flawless glass. We saw the promenade deck, the boat deck, the towering funnels reaching up into the eternal night. And it was all perfect. The silence in the sphere was absolute. "Take us to the bow," Thorne whispered, his academic composure finally cracking. The sub banked gently, its thrusters barely making a sound. The lights swept across the front of the ship, climbing up the knife edge of its prow. And there, illuminated in the stark white beams, was the name. It was painted in elegant, gold leaf letters, untouched by time or the sea. It wasn't Titanic. It was a name that had no business being there. A name that belonged only to blueprints and forgotten history books. Near Olympian. Thorne let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a lifetime. "That's impossible," he breathed, his voice filled with a kind of sacred awe. "That's utterly impossible." He looked at me, his eyes wide. "Captain, the Olympic-class liners, there were only 3. The Olympic, which was scrapped in the 30s. The Trad-Uvicu, which we all know. And the Trad-Britannic, which sank as a hospital ship in the Aegean. A 4th ship, the Olympian Fies, was planned. Her keel was laid down in Belfast, but construction was halted after the Titanic disaster. She was never completed. She was scrapped on the slipway. She never touched the water." He ran a hand through his hair, his mind clearly struggling to reconcile the history he had dedicated his life to with the impossible truth floating just feet from our viewport. This ship does not exist." And yet there it was. We spent another hour circling it, documenting it, our cameras capturing every perfect detail. There were no signs of life. No bodies, no scattered luggage, no debris field. There was no sign of a sinking at all. The lifeboats were still in their davits. The deck chairs were neatly stacked. It was a perfectly preserved ghost ship that, according to a century of records, was never even built. The mystery wasn't that it had sunk. The mystery was that it had ever sailed at all. How did a ship that was never finished end up here, 3 miles down in a trench off Cape Cod, without a single scratch on it? Who built it in secret, and why? As we began our ascent, leaving the impossible giant to its silent vigil in the dark, I knew they would bury this. This wasn't a discovery. It was a problem, an anomaly that could break history. And the ocean was the perfect place to keep it hidden. What would you do if you found something that rewrites history itself? Would you have the courage to pull something like that from the deep? Let me know what you think. And subscribe if you want to hear more stories from the places the light doesn't reach, because they don't always want you to know what's down there. The ascent back to the world of light felt like a betrayal. Leaving that impossible ship behind, alone in the crushing dark, felt wrong. Dr. Thorne was silent for the entire 3-hour journey back to the surface, his face a mask of academic shock and something else, fear. When the Triton finally broke the surface and was hoisted back into the belly of the Atlantis, the world we returned to was not the one we had left. The quiet, scientific curiosity was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, efficient authority. Men in dark suits and naval uniforms were everywhere. Our discovery was no longer ours. It had been confiscated. The official story was crafted with surgical precision. My crew and I were taken into the main conference room of the Atlantis, the salt still stiff in our clothes, and told what we had found. It was, they explained, a highly sensitive piece of Cold War technology. A prototype submarine designed to look like a wreck on sonar to act as a deep-sea listening post. A relic of a bygone era of espionage. The name Olympian? A clever piece of misdirection. The perfect condition. Advanced alloys and anti-corrosion techniques that were still classified. It was a neat, tidy explanation that accounted for everything and explained nothing. It was a lie, and we all knew it. But the documents they placed in front of us made it clear that arguing was not an option. They were non-disclosure agreements, but that's a gentle term for what they were. They were vows of silence, bound by threats of treason in federal prison. We were to forget the name Mons Olympian Nunt. We were to forget the perfect preservation. We were to forget everything we saw. In exchange for our silence, we were given a reward. A check was slid across the table to me, a sum with enough zeros on it to make a man forget his own name. It wasn't a salvage fee, it was a gag order, bought and paid for. Arthur took his share without a word, his eyes distant. He sold the Chudnock Sea Serpent a month later and moved to Florida. I hear he spends his days fishing for marlin, never going out far enough to lose sight of the shore. Charlie Grant took his money and vanished. I think the kid just wanted to get as far away from the ocean as he could. And Leo? They saw something in Leo. One of the men in suits took him aside, and a week later, his mother told me he'd taken a government job. A research position, she said. I never saw him again. They told us they were recovering the asset. For a month, that patch of ocean was a restricted zone, patrolled by cutters. They brought in deep-sea salvage platforms, colossal machines that I knew, even with all their technology, couldn't possibly lift a 50,000-ton ocean liner from a 3-mile depth. It was a show, a performance for spy satellites and passing ships. Then, one day, it was all gone. The zone was lifted. The official report, buried on page 16 of a national newspaper, stated that a sensitive historical artifact had been successfully and discreetly recovered. The ocean went back to being empty. The secret was safe. But they didn't get everything. In the chaos of that first day, when they were confiscating our equipment, downloading our logs, I did something small. Something I'm still not sure was brave or foolish. While their tech was distracted, I copied a single file from the ROV's hard drive onto a tiny thumb drive. It was just 30 seconds of footage from our initial survey, the last 30 seconds before I made the call. I've only watched it a handful of times, in the dead of night, on an old laptop that's never been connected to the internet. The footage is grainy, lit only by the eye's floodlights. It shows a slow pan up the side of the Olympian's hull, past the perfect portholes of the promenade deck. It's exactly as I remember it. A silent, pristine tomb. Except for one frame. A single fleeting image that I didn't even notice at the time. Just as the ROV begins to pull away, for a split second there's a change in one of the portholes on A deck. It's a flicker, a soft, warm, yellow light, like that of a candle or an old oil lantern. It appears from the deep blackness inside the room, glows for an instant, and then is extinguished. It wasn't a reflection from our lights. It wasn't a bioluminescent creature. It was deliberate. It was inside. That single frame changed everything. The Olympian wasn't a wreck. It wasn't a tomb. It wasn't empty. We hadn't just found a ship. We had disturbed something. Something that was hiding. I still live by the sea, but I don't look at it the same way. I used to see it as a keeper of history, a place of endings. Now I see it as a veil. A place where impossible things can exist, undisturbed, in the crushing silence. The sea doesn't just take things. Sometimes, it offers a sanctuary. I look out at the horizon, and I don't think about the money or the NDAs. I think about that perfect, impossible ship sitting in a trench that wasn't on any map. And I think about that flicker of light in the window. Some ships aren't lost to the sea. They're just waiting. And you have to ask yourself, what, exactly, was the Olympian hiding from? Let me know your theories in the comments. What do you think was really behind a ship that should have never existed? Subscribe for more stories from the deep, because sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't about what we've lost, but about what's been hidden from us all along.